if I'd leave the last 5 pages for tomorrow morning, as I really was starting to pass out. I put the book down to my left, important detail, and had my bookmark just hanging off the side. I closed my eyes and passed out. At some point in the night, I awoke. I couldn't move my body. And that is when I saw it. The moon was high in the sky, and through the moonlight illuminating the tent, I could see the definitive outline of the shadow, the creature that had stalked my waking dreams. I was absolutely terrified. It was back. I knew things were too good to be true. I was completely paralyzed as the shadow grew closer to me. In doing so, I think I managed to blink, and it got even closer, closer than it had ever gotten before. It stuck its little finger out and approached me. It was getting closer, and the fear was drawing within me, like this was some kind of sick game, and it knew that the closer it got, the more and more strain my little heart would have. It touched me. I didn't feel anything though, just cold, very cold, and like that, it was gone. I didn't know what to do. I was still completely paralyzed, and just lie there in fear. At some point I managed to regain control of my body, and started moving around. It was at this point I really wish I had some caffeine to keep me going. No way I wanted to experience that again. And in moving around whilst getting my legs free, my husband tapped me on the shoulder. He looked pale, paler than I'd ever seen him before. A detail about my husband is that he's a very heavy sleeper. Nothing will wake him. His sleep is almost like a hibernation, I joke, and he's big and fluffy like a bear. But that's besides the point. He looks at me, wide-eyed, and said, "Did you see that?" I ask him what he's referring to, and he seems almost too embarrassed to say. And then he goes on to confess that he saw a tall, dark creature made of shadow, standing at the foot of my sleeping bag, and then slowly approaching me until it disappeared. At this point, I started to freak out. That wasn't sleep paralysis? Then what the hell was it? Was I being tormented by a spirit? This really got to us both. We quietly left the camp at 4 a.m. after packing everything up and drove the 2 hours back home. I was freaking out hard on the car ride home, and my husband took the initiative to call one of his friends, who was in contact with a Navajo shaman. He came round our house the next day, spoke to me for a bit, and gave me and the house a blessing, said a few words, and was quickly on his way. From what I gathered, he told me that I had a demon following me around, or a spirit, and that what he did would mean it would leave me alone. I personally didn't believe in any of that stuff. I thought it was all sleep paralysis, and it was a lot to take in the existence of paranormal entities from one morning to the next. However, whatever he did worked. Me and my husband never saw or experienced anything like that again. And I never experienced sleep paralysis either, which I'm sure is a good thing. It makes me wonder though, did I ever experience sleep paralysis? Or was it always this thing feeding on me, tormenting me? I guess I'll never know. My story is the exact reverse of many others. When I was in Scouts, or rather the local equivalent, as legally, adult Scouts had to do the 3 feather challenge. 1 day without food, 1 day without speaking, and 1 day and night alone in the woods, with only a knife and a tarp, unseen by any human, after which one has to sneak back to the scout camp unnoticed by the sentries and report to the campmaster. It was my third day, so I took off and walked for miles through the woods and found the most remote spot in the wilderness, most overgrown part of the woods. I spent a spooky but uneventful night until almost before dawn, when I decided to go for a morning swim in the lake, right before taking off to go back. I stripped nude and went towards the lake, but noticed a group of guys fishing, so decided to go back. The ground underneath my feet caved in, and I found myself submerged up to the armpits in the most absolute vilest mass I had ever smelt. It was a pit, where the poachers dumped the guts and leftovers of illegally hunted deer, and it had fermented for weeks. A group of anglers hear some ungodly screaming from the direction of the woods, and run there to see if anyone needs help, when they see a teenager-shaped ghoul covered completely in blood and rotten offal, who is crawling out of a bloody hole in the ground, while shrieking and weeping, and then runs at them naked, to get to the lake, and washed off. It was terrifying for all of us. I used to be in a group that is somewhat akin to the Scouts, so we spent a lot of time in the woods, and some weird shit happened often, but most of the time it was easy to explain. Other things happened that to this day scare the living crap out of me. I was a leader for the age group of 8 to 10, and we were out on a camping trip. It was the first year we stayed on that terrain, and it was huge. Normally, we tend to explore the majority of a terrain before the kids arrive, so that we're aware of any possible danger spots to avoid. This time it was impossible. Every camp, we have what is called a night game. It's usually a scary game in which the kids have to complete several tasks while the leaders scare the ever-loving crap out of them. Obviously, we had one too during the camp. We masked up as some monsters and hid out in the woods close to the checkpoints they had to pass. While running in between checkpoints, I found an open stretch of forest with little to no foliage, so it was ideal for chasing after them. There was no real room to hide besides trees, so I couldn't use my flashlight or they would be able to see me from miles away. It was dark, like the unsettling kind of dark that plays tricks on you, and you start imagining things that aren't real. During my stay there, I saw a shadow that was around my size run past me a few times. I couldn't see it very well, so I assumed I was just imagining things, because nothing was there when I turned my flashlight on. The game was nearing its end, and I saw the shadow again. This time, I could see it vaguely standing near a tree not too far away from me. I thought it was one of the other leaders, hiding to scare the kids, and decided to go over there, as it was about the time to go back. I aimed my flashlight towards the tree, and while getting closer, I noticed that there was indeed someone standing there dressed in what looked like a torn burlap sack, and had their head covered with a few white plastic bags that looked like they were tied together. I started to feel pure dread. Something really felt off. I asked if everything was okay, but they didn't respond. The only thing I heard was this weird sound that sounded like someone knocking on wood. Nevertheless, I went closer until I was about 10 meters away from the person. The knocking sound turned out to be that person smacking his head repeatedly into the tree, and I noticed he looked like a male. He was barefoot. His arms were covered with crusted mud, and his hands were in weird cramped positions.